Growing up on the edges of the Cumbrian Lake District, the surrounding landscape has always provided a source of inspiration, especially on my composition. When approaching this project, I was inspired to use my experiences of the Cumbrian landscape as a starting point on which to develop an original piece, attempting to convey my connection to the area through musical techniques and to encapsulate the overarching atmosphere of the lakes within 3 movements. With this project in mind, I began to conduct research into the concept of programmatic music, in which the sonic quality of the music itself symbolises an extra musical source. Though popularised in classical and romantic scores, programmatic elements are present throughout many of the minimalist, post-minimalist and ambient works where my primary interest as a composer lies, such as Olafur Arnold's Island Songs, George Winston's Autumn, Jan Tierson's Yusa and Brian Eno's 4 ambient albums, the first of which I will use as a case study for my own project later in this presentation. Whilst Eno's work, in particular Ambient 4 Music on Land, explores the wider concept of location as an external influence on their music, referencing a number of seemingly unrelated locations, artists such as Tierson, Winston and Arnold hone in on presenting a specific place through their music. Yusa, consisting of solo piano pieces with accompanying ambient soundscapes, was inspired by Tierson's home on the island of Ushant off Brittany, a homage to his native land, whilst many of the tracks on Winston's Autumn and December were inspired by Billings, Montana, in both cases constructing a picture of not only a location, but a specific season. Though the project will represent my native landscape and love for the Lake District, I'm hoping that a potential audience will be able to connect with its themes of geographical space and beauty in the natural landscape, regardless of the locations it evokes in each individual listener. Richard King writes, "The imagination of the listener, who travels to their own mental destination when experiencing the music, decides its location, a place known only to them, in the countryside of the mind." And I feel this quote encapsulates my aspirations for the piece beyond the scope of the course. Assessing the compositional and stylistic elements of the project forced me to define my impressions of the overarching atmosphere of the Cumbrian landscape and how this might be represented in music. In order to convey my emotional response to the bleak landscape of the Lake District, I am drawing from the ideals and stylistic techniques of ambient and minimalist music to create a melancholy, expansive soundscape. The emotions I personally experience surrounding the area are those of contentment and relaxation, detaching oneself from the stress and speed of everyday life. This mirrors the overarching themes of ambient music, which aims to provide a soundtrack to counteract the chaos of the modern world, an unobtrusive addition to the environment, encapsulated by Max Richter's description of his 8-hour composition Sleep as a personal lullaby for a frenetic world, a manifesto for a slower pace of existence. Richter's quote solidifies the intention of ambient music as a backdrop to another activity, a soundtrack rather than a specific focal point. Brian Eno, an early proponent of the ambient genre, writes, "Ambient music must be able to accommodate many levels of listening attention without enforcing one in particular. It must be as ignorable as it is interesting." To me, this reflects the atmosphere of the Cumbrian landscape which I am trying to present, that of a sense of stillness and tranquility. In order to inform my own stylistic choices, I am looking at a range of existing works to employ as case studies when creating my project, in particular Eno's seminal 1978 album Ambient 1 Music for Airports, a precursor to the more location-based Ambient 4 previously discussed in regards to programmatic music. Discussing the album, John Lyska describes the 48-minute work as emerging out of a complex history of what we might call music for peripheral attention. One of the ways in which Eno evokes these ambient soundscapes is through a departure from conventional harmonic movement and tonal narrative, focusing on the interweaving texture of melodic lines rather than the functionality of the underlying harmony. Many of the concepts and techniques employed by Eno and found across the ambient genre were influenced by the work of minimalist and post-minimalist artists such as Steve Reich and Philip Glass, another important source of reference during the conception of my project. Eno himself described minimalism as a drift away from narrative and towards landscape, from performed event to sonic space, highlighting the relevance of the minimalist movement to both my own work and its connection on the later ambient genre. Both minimalist and ambient music favour a programmatic soundscape over a linear musical plot, and this is a key concept that will underpin my project. Keith Potter's discussion of commonly employed techniques in minimal music, examples of which I've included in the current slide, is an important reference point when approaching the composition itself, and highlights many of the key elements I'm looking to draw from, as well as the artists who have previously utilised them, and to what effect. Reich's work in particular, for instance Electric Counterpoint Movement 3, as well as Glass's iconic Einstein on the Beach, pioneers the concept of music as a gradual process, in which the composition develops through systematic means, often through the addition of notes within a phrase or the augmentation of pulses within a bar. This is a technique I will be exploring, employed in my own works through the gradual development of a motif over time. Gradual melodic development mirrors the aforementioned solo piano work of Jan Tiersen, who often methodically applies additive or transformative variations to a theme, underpinned by left-hand ostinati-like patterns. This can be seen in a number of works from 2015's Yusa, such as Porsgare, Penaroch and Armanur Koz. Though rooted more in a contemporary classical and post-minimalist style, Tiersen's employment of minimalist and ambient techniques to inform his own personal style, as well as his programmatic approach to encapsulating a specific location, provided an early inspiration for my project and will serve as a case study moving forwards into the creation stage of my work. It is this juxtaposition of stylistic concepts, the combination of ambience, minimalism and Western classical techniques found in the work of Tiersen, Richter, Arnolds and many others that fascinates me in the creation of my own project. To summarise, I am aiming to create an original piece which builds on the principles of ambience and minimalism in music to create a unique sonic landscape reflecting my personal experiences of the Cumbrian landscape, interpreted through the employment of techniques such as slow harmonic rhythms, the use of ostinati and repetitive melodic motifs, often developed through an additive process, and a modal or drone-based approach to harmonic writing, avoiding the functional tonality of Western classical conventions. In contrast to the music concrete approach of Eno and Reich, I'll be arranging this work for the intention of a solo piano performance. The composition itself will be scored using the notation software MuseScore 3 and submitted as a single PDF, though I'm hoping to produce a professionally printed score of the work, a copy of which could also be provided for the lecturers if required. For the final audio submission, the composition as a whole will be recorded in the Sighthill Music Box studio, performed by myself, recorded by the college staff and mixed by myself. Though I am looking to be assessed solely as a composer, rather than a performer or producer, I feel that recording the work as a live performance, rather than employing digital sample libraries, will realise my composition in its most effective form, allowing for the precise expression of the score to be executed, as well as identifying any technical impracticalities in my writing. This better reflects the work I would undertake if pursuing a career in composition, working in a live recording environment, and potentially amending my work during the recording process. The piano parts will be performed by myself on one of the college's upright pianos, and I am currently exploring the possibility of recording with a strip of cloth or felt placed underneath the hammers to achieve the soft piano sound beloved by contemporary composers such as Olafur Arnalds and Nils Frahm. My intention is to record in the Music Box studio early in the new year. Truncated passages of the work may be showcased later during extracurricular college events, however I intend to limit the recording process to include only myself and the necessary college staff, rather than recording the work in front of a live audience, to create a more intimate recording and allow for retakes. The 3 movements will be recorded separately to allow for ease of performance, recording and mixing. Sarah May, the Music Box sound technician, will organise the recording equipment, and lecturer Scott Hanna has kindly agreed to film the process, the footage of which will be submitted as part of my project dissemination. This current projection of the project, as a fully notated score accompanied by a single audio file of the recorded work, involves relying heavily on the availability of the Music Box studio and staff early in the new year. In order to prepare for any unforeseen circumstances, such as illness, college closures or unavoidable commitments from the staff, I have identified 2 obvious backup plans available to me. In a scenario in which the auditorium, studio and college staff are unavailable, I will perform and record the piano from home using a MIDI sample library, most likely the UVI Workstation Basic Dry Grand Piano Model D plugin, potentially with the tone rolled off to replicate the aforementioned felted sound. I also have the Spitfire Audio Originals Firewood Piano plugin available to me, which would provide a more intimate atmosphere, emulating an old upright piano and incorporating a felted preset, as well as the Arturia Analog Lab 4 selection of grand and upright piano plugins. If through unforeseen circumstances I am unable to have the piano part performance ready, I will export the MuseScore project as a MIDI file and input this into the DAW itself, applying the same plugins, mixing and exporting the audio, and submitting this as an audio file along with the score. The composition process itself will be undertaken primarily during November, December and the beginning of January. In order to allow myself time to mix the recorded audio following the studio sessions, I'm aiming to complete the composition by the beginning of January 2023, following which I can thoroughly practice the piece and ideally become acquainted with the piano itself before the recording takes place. Allowing myself approximately a month to rehearse, plus formative practice as I write the piece during November and December, I hope to organise a first recording session at the beginning of February, I'm expecting it will take 2 or 3 sessions to achieve suitable takes of all the movements, following which I can begin work on mixing the audio, compiling the separate movements into a single roughly 20-minute audio file. I'm hoping to mix the audio using the digital audio workstation Logic Pro. However, this is subject to change depending on guidance from the studio technicians. During February, I will also edit the video footage provided by Scott Hanna. During the research stage of my project, I've made use of the National Library of Scotland's reading rooms and online database on a weekly basis in order to conduct in-depth research into the thematic and stylistic components that will shape my composition, as well as utilising the Central Library's extensive sheet music collection. I have also used many of the relevant books I own to inform my project. All of these texts are included in the reference section and bibliography at the end of this presentation. Entering the practical stage of the module, producing the required work itself, I'm working primarily from within the music box, using the rehearsal booth pianos to practice and arrange parts, or from home using my digital piano. I tend to write my initial ideas down on manuscript paper by hand, as well as recording a voice memo on my phone before inputting the content into MuseScore and making any changes that I feel are required. I've compiled a list of what I feel are the most important resources during the creation of my project. Once the project is submitted, I intend to release the recorded piece on online streaming sites such as SoundCloud and Spotify, allowing members of the public to stream the work for free, aided by promotion of the release through my social media sites. Though online streaming in itself offers a limited source of income to the artist, it's an effective means of building a public following and can expose your music to a greater audience through its potential inclusion on playlists or recommendations. Gaining a small group of active listeners, especially in a concentrated area, might provide greater opportunities to perform the piece live at solo gigs, which I hope to do upon moving back to the Lake District following the degree. My local pub, a thriving business close to the Cumbrian Fells, has approached me regarding Saturday night solo piano performances, and having original work with a local connection might allow me to build a following amongst the community. I will also be using the completed work to build my portfolio as a composer, demonstrating my experience of writing and performing original music. After a year out following the degree, gaining practical performance experience and sitting further piano and theory exams, I am hoping to apply for a master's degree in composition, for which an original portfolio of work is usually a requirement, along with the minimum 2-1 result in a music-related degree. A master's in composition would provide the necessary qualifications and skills required to subsequently apply for a PhD in composition and allow me to hone even further in on the areas of contemporary composition which fascinate and excite me. The primary stakeholder for the project is, of course, myself. Successfully completing and recording the composition will help me to both progress in postgraduate education and gain career experience through performing the work live and releasing it online. Other stakeholders include Edinburgh College and Kingston University, with whom I am studying, since it is of course beneficial to both institutions if my project is successful and achieves a high mark. Though my current stakeholders are limited due to the piece being produced within the confines of an educational setting, and the future release of the work involving solely myself without the input of a record label, potential future stakeholders might include film and advertising companies looking to employ the piece in their work. Since the project is loosely based on the principles of ambient music, I am hoping that the recorded work, once released, will attract an audience of both active and passive listeners with an interest in contemporary solo piano composition, allowing the music to both function as a focal point, such as in the context of a solo piano performance, and provide a background for other activities such as studying, painting or walking. William Moylan writes, "The difference between active and passive listening is the listener's attention and involvement, and I'm hoping that my work will be able to accommodate both forms of listening. During my time at Edinburgh College, I've consistently used ambient and minimalist music as an effective means to focus while studying, and I'm keen to create a piece of music that could be utilised to a similar effect." Thank you for listening. My reference list, bibliography and image and music credits are included both here and at the bottom of the website to allow external links to be easily opened, and an overview of my previous experience as a composer, as well as external links to my work, is included on the site below this presentation.